So the length of your biography is directly proportionate to your age, is that right? So all that means is that we're old. We've been around for a long time. In fact, my bio is going to be really short. Dr. Bell and I combined have 32 years in Oklahoma City Public Schools. Right? I have one, and she has 31. In 10 days, I get to say that I have completed my first year as superintendent in Oklahoma City Public Schools. So that's the good news. The bad news is, if you know the district over the last 20 years, that's about the average. Yeah, so I'm just average. I got to make it one more year, right? So I'm especially glad to be in this room with this group. And we talk all the time about those who talk about kids need to meet a two-pronged test. And we believe that everybody in the room meets the two-pronged test. One is that we love kids. And I think anybody would tell you, I love kids. If you ask, absolutely we love kids. But the second prong is equally important to us. And that is that you're committed. You're fully, genuinely committed to the safety and the welfare of kids. And you can demonstrate that in your life, professional life, personal life, and I would suggest that everybody in this room meets those two prongs. So we're especially grateful to be here with you today. So unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've probably heard about this thing called Pathway to Greatness, right? It's a reinvention. I'm going to take about a 4.5-hour presentation. We're going to whittle it down to a few minutes, but I want to talk about this because this has everything to do with kids. We're going to follow that up with Embrace OKC, and Teri will drive at that time, and I'll provide some color commentary, but we want to give you a dose of both of these today. So this reinvention started, probably 1.5 years, 2 years ago with a Board of Education finally saying we're tired of talking about doing right by kids. We're tired of talking about the inequities that exist across our district, where it matters what part of the district you live in as to whether or not you got opportunity. Our Board of Education said, let's commit to action, and then subsequent to that decision, they went full speed into policy. They went full speed into a full initiative. And so I'm not going to read all these, but I think the important thing on this slide is that very first bullet point. It talks about status quo. We know that if we continue to do the same thing we've always done. Now, if you're getting brilliant, unbelievable results, then yeah, do that. Keep doing the same thing. But we decided that we could not get consensus anywhere that Oklahoma City Public Schools was an excellent school district. Nobody said yes to that. It was in pockets, and that wasn't good enough, so our board said status quo is not acceptable. We've got to take action so that we can move toward an excellent school district, which we believe is the best answer for our kids. We found some things that were very troubling to us as we began investigating our own district, doing that full, comprehensive audit of how are we doing business? What does our status quo look like? One of the most troubling things we found was this number right here, that only 24% of our elementary schools had at least one full-time counselor. Okay, now you know as well as anybody, anywhere, all the challenges that our kids come to school with. And I know we cliche that to death. Well, kids are dealing with things today more so than we did when we were kids. Well, yeah, absolutely. But that's not an excuse not to meet their challenges, right? So we said, this is unacceptable. We need full-time counselors, at least one in every single elementary. So through Pathway to Greatness, we get that. This doesn't even speak really to the need for social workers, for the behavioral health supports aside from counselors. If you know much about the school business over the last 20 years, the role of the counselor has changed dramatically. It used to be that a counselor was just that. If I had an issue as a student, if I had a concern, I could make an appointment or just swing by. I could sit down with my counselor and I could get the help I need. We have turned counselors over the last 20 years into test monitors, playground supervisors, lunch supervisors, anything where there was a gap in the life of a kid, we would stick a counselor in there. And then, whenever we faced budget reductions in our state, who were the first people to go? Because there are guidelines and not hard and fast laws in some cases on ratios. Counselors, art teachers, music teachers were all the first to go. So it's this contradiction of we know the challenges our kids have, yet we have not done anything about it. So we said we're going to do something about it. You see over here, Embrace OKC. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and then Teri's really going to jump into that in a minute. But Embrace OKC is that second leg of the compact. And if you're not familiar with the compact, it's that consortium of leadership from the city, from the schools, from the United Way, from the foundation, and from the chamber. So we sit in a room every month and we talk about kids. That's all we talk about. How can we better support our kids in Oklahoma City Public Schools and beyond? And so Embrace OKC came on the heels of Read OKC. If you followed Read OKC, it was a literacy initiative where we're getting books into the hands of kids and parents to try and improve their literacy, knowing that that's a foundation for everything else. And we've had great success with Read OKC. So Embrace OKC now comes in and says, we're going to take an approach that's different than anybody in Oklahoma has ever seen. And what we're hearing as this word is getting out is that not many people across our country have seen this. We're matching agencies with individual kids, schools, and neighborhoods. So it's not the one-size-fits-all, here's your menu, take it or leave it. We are actually going to take teams into schools and tailor our approach to the needs of that school, of that student. It is outstanding. So if you think of it this way, you know our city, you know that the needs of kids on the northeast side may be much different than the needs of kids who are south of I-40, right? So in the past, we've just said, here's our program, take it or leave it. We're saying we recognize that the needs are different, starkly different in some cases, and we're going to bring resources to you. And so we're really excited about that. We're going to look at some numbers here in a minute that help us decide what do those needs look like based upon the area. This is just another piece of reinvention that outlines some of the things that we identified as gaps and what we're doing about the gaps. And then we've aligned it to our strategic plan. Another belief that we have is that we don't want to throw everything out if things are working. And so we know that we have a strategic plan that is strong. It hasn't been used appropriately, but it's good work. And so we want to align new work, P2G, to work that already exists and makes sense. It's an alignment. So that's what this represents. But if you look at these things, I would argue that particularly in our suburban districts, some of our neighboring districts, they already have all of these things. And so we're putting kids out into the world when they leave us already at a disadvantage compared to kids, not worldwide, not statewide, not internationally, but other kids in districts that live right around us. We're not competing. When you look at art, music, and PE, science labs, opportunities for kids to learn, project-based type learning, STEAM space. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with STEM and STEAM, and our commitment was that in every single elementary, we would have a space dedicated to STEAM, so that kids could get hands-on learning every day, whether it's through club or whether it's through the curriculum, for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. In our district, prior to P2G, of our 54 elementaries, 2 elementaries had any space in the school dedicated to STEAM. When we're done with P2G implementation, every single elementary will have space dedicated to what we believe is an important aspect of their schooling. So you see counselors, you see reduced class sizes, etc. So this is all part of reinvention. I talked to you a little bit about the compact. One of the things I love about a group like this, if there is such a thing. Is there a group like this? Probably not. Is in society, we have many times reduced children to a statistic, to a number, a political football that we use to get our way. And while we need statistics, and we're actually going to go over a number of statistics in a minute, statistics and numbers standing alone is not doing service or justice to our kids. What I think is true about this room is we add to the number a name, a face, a family, and a situation. So when we think about decision making, we ask the question multiple times, not daily, but when we get together as an admin team, we talk about the name, we talk about the face, we talk about the family, we talk about the situation. So I want to give you one because this helps us as we're making decisions. We talk about this in our compact group as well. If we can come back to the kids as we're making decisions, that doesn't make our lives easier. Because then you eliminate some of the emotion, you eliminate some of the politics, and you're truly making decisions based on what is in the best interest of our kids. So here's a story I want to tell you, a true story. 2 weeks into my job, I was the beaten path guy. I'd go from my home to work, and I'd go to ball games, and I'd go to choir I had my pathway. I really didn't drive into neighborhoods much as a superintendent. Well, my first 2 weeks I started driving. I tried to drive the whole city. I tried to get to every school. By December 1 was my goal. And what I saw was what you already know. There are some heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stories in our city. Kids who attend our schools, and many people like me see them as a student. Okay, I go to work, I go home. They come to school, they go home. And we don't think many times beyond student. I'm an employee. I know this child is a student. So I start driving, and I'm not going to tell you the area, but I start driving these neighborhoods, and it's 800 square foot home, stacked on top of each other, block after block after block. The only AC they have is hanging out of a window, and many of them are broken. Not much grass, a lot of rocks, a lot of weeds. I'm driving in the middle of the day, and I'm seeing moms, kids playing out in the front. This is on a school day in the middle of the day. These are school-age kids. And I just stop and I start talking to them. And I talk to a kid who's a 4th grade kid. Cutest kid, bright, held a conversation with him. And here's his life. And I would suggest to you that this story is the equivalent to thousands, literally, of our kids. He gets up in the morning. His mother has already gone to work. He has a 2nd grade sister. His job is to get up, get her dressed, feed the 2 of them, gather up all their stuff, and get on that bus. At the end of the day, when he comes home, his mother is not home from her 2nd job yet. This is, and you guys know this, you've seen this in what you do. So when he gets home, he has his homework to take care of. Whatever homework a 2nd grader has, he's got to help her with that, or a project. He's got to find something for them to eat. And then mom has usually left a list of, here's some things I need to do before I get home. So he has become, as a 4th grader, there's no father in the house. He's become the mother, the father, the tutor, as a 4th grader. And so I asked him, well, how come you're not at school? And he said, well, my mom tells me that because I work so hard during the week, I get to take 1 day off a week. And that is the family dynamic in this particular home. So I want you to think about the mental side of this. This kid goes to school, and we checked with teacher and principal on this. And sometimes he's tired, and in his room, he will put his head down on his desk. And because we need to do a little bit more training, that becomes a sign of what? I'm putting my head down in a classroom, that's a disrespect, or that's a defiance. So I asked the kid, hey, get your head up. We don't put our heads down in here. Because teacher, many times, unless you've been doing this for a while, doesn't recognize what she is seeing. And so that story that I told you about, family dynamic, in the school becomes a disciplinary problem, and that child is sent to the office. So think about the mental. I think as a fourth grader, I'm doing everything right. I'm taking care of my family. I've stepped in. I worry about if I'm going to eat over the weekend. I worry about, is my little sister going to eat? Is my mom coming home? What time is it going to be? Is it going to be 10? Is it going to be 11? And I go to school and get in trouble because I'm tired. So the mental side of this is what we think Embrace OKC represents. That is one example. That we can come in with services. It may be that we need professional development in that school. Trauma-informed training. We need to help this young man with how to deal with a single parent who's never home. And the list goes on. And I think that's what we represent, is hope for students just like that. So when we think about kids, we think about more than a number. We think about name, we think about face, we think about family, and we think about situations, circumstances. So Teri, are you going to take it from there?
Do one more.
I do one more? We've done this before. Why address mental health? I tell this to people, I gave it away, that you know, in school districts, we characterize our district based upon the number of high school kids we have. When we're talking about athletics, it's a Class A high school, 3A high school, 5A high school. We have enough homeless kids in our school district to start our own 5A high school. We have 5,000 kids in our district alone who are reported, classified as homeless. And so another layer of that mental health piece that we've got to be very aware of and very sensitive to. You can see some other numbers up here. You know, we like to think, and I know there are people across our district who can put a face and a name in a situation to 5,000 kids. I'm very confident of that, whether it's a principal or a counselor or a teacher, or central office folks who work with those families.
We can find research that says when we have kiddos there who have experienced 3 or more ACE indicators, they are 4.9 times more likely to have attendance problems, or 6.1 more likely to have behavior issues. And you guys can see the chart. So again, reinforcing why is it we need to do something. Because when you look at that and look at kids who have experienced trauma or violence or delinquency, we're looking at test scores. Unfortunately, as schools, that's what we have to look at sometimes. You know, we look at kids, but then we also have to look at test scores. Those are kiddos who typically score a full level below kids who have not experienced the same types of situations. And so just looking through, if we can put into place various preventions, research has shown 10% gains in test scores and in academic performance. What we did do when the compact said, hey, let's look at what is going on in Oklahoma City Public Schools. We did the OP&A with our 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. Got about 7,000 responses, which was about an 80% response rate. And we came up with the 3 areas we were going to focus on. Now, did we have other areas we needed to look at? Yes. But our 3 major areas: substance use, high-risk behaviors, and psychological distress. Those were 3 areas we said we've got to get a plan in place for these 3 areas. Alcohol use, when we looked at our kids in comparison to the kids across the state, it wasn't the fact that they had a higher risk of alcohol or used alcohol anymore than their state peers. But what did stand out was a couple of things. First thing, which is not on this slide, was our kids had a tendency to binge drink more often than their state peers. And at the same time, when they did binge drink, they drank more drinks at a sitting. And so that stood out. But what was more, I guess, a cry for help was when we asked our kids, have you talked to your parents about the use of alcohol, drugs? We had 74% of our kids who said, in the last year, I haven't had any discussion whatsoever with my parents on alcohol. Now 65% said no, I haven't on drug use. But then as we look as a community, we have to look that 1.5 times the number of our state peers, our kiddos could go into the nearest retail store and purchase it. So as a community, we need to look to see who are those retail outlets that our kids can walk in and purchase. At the same time, if you look at 37% said, hey, I get it from someone older. And then almost 28% said, I get it at home from my parents. So there, we need to start doing some education to the adults. And I'm going to trip over the microphone in just a minute, so catch me when I fall. The second thing was high-risk behaviors. Those are behaviors such as carrying a handgun, being drunk at school, using or selling drugs, stealing a vehicle, intentionally attacking someone with the intent to harm them. That's why we chose high-risk behaviors, because of the numbers of our kids who were already exhibiting high-risk behaviors and the fact the behavior started so early in their life. When we look at the actual data, we have about 32% of our kids who say, hey, my parents look very favorable on that type of behavior. We have 27% that say, I come from a family history of that type of behavior. You guys know that. You're in our community. You know, you see them in the court systems. You see the second generation of kids coming through. I'm going to back up to this. Another piece of that, we had 33% of our kids who said, my 4 closest friends are also exhibiting the same behavior. So when we look at the generation and again, the second generation of these kids, we've got to do something to intervene. Here's one that really gets to me: psychological distress. There were questions such as, in the last 30 days, how often have you felt hopeless, worthless, so depressed, nothing could cheer you up? You felt nervous, restless, or fidgety. Now, we all have those times in the last month that we have felt that way. But then we get into another situation and we're fine. Right now, some of you may be restless and fidgety, but as soon as the meeting's over, you'll be good. However, these kids said most or all of the time they feel that way. So 1 in 5 feel hopeless. 1 in 5 have felt most or all the time worthless. 1 in 5, most or all the time, have felt depressed, that nothing could cheer them up. So when we look at that data, I think those in the compact and those of us in the district knew our data would be pretty, I don't want to say depressing, but overwhelming. I don't think we knew it was going to hit quite like this. That we have approximately half of our kids who are in moderate to severe psychological distress. So if you think of that, you're sitting in a classroom with 20 kids, you probably have 9 or 10 kids who are sitting there in psychological distress. When asked if they had committed suicide, or attempted to commit suicide at least one time in the last 12 months, we had 361 kids who said, yes, I have at least attempted. When we dig deeper into that, the number is higher than that for those kids who had written out a plan, who actually had a plan. Almost double that, those who thought seriously about committing suicide. Now, if you go the other way, there was actually a part in there that was, they've attempted 3 to 4 times, 5 to 6 times. And we've got around 50 kids who say, hey, I have attempted at least 5 or 6 times in the last 12 months. Now that's when this survey is bad, in the sense that it's confidential. We don't know who those kids are. So that leads us to the positive. We look pretty sad here. There are some positives here. Why is the school an important place? For a couple of reasons. And I'm going to skip over to the middle. 63% of our kids, in comparison to the state, where 60%, said, hey, I have opportunities at school for some positive behavior. It's there at school. And then 59% said, and if I act in a positive way, there is some positive reinforcement I get from school, which lines up wonderfully with Embrace OKC. If that's where they're feeling safe and have the positive relations, it's the best place in the world to start doing some interventions. Now the second column, or I'm sorry, the first column, 65% of our kids know there is a moral order and believe there is a moral order, a right and wrong. So I look at that 2 ways. Number one, it's a great foundation to build on. The other side of that, I look at it and think, how many of our kids come from a family history of at-risk behaviors, however they know what's right and wrong? So how many of our kids are in a situation they know that they're in a place that they shouldn't be, that they want change? And so interventions at school, hopefully we can start doing those type of interventions. Now, what happened after we got the data, we had a subcommittee who developed a plan. Has both prevention and Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions. I'm going to real quickly, as I'm watching the clock, kind of run through. The overarching idea of the plan was that we got to train staff. Just as Dr. McDaniel said, we've got to get them more knowledgeable about that child who comes in and puts their head down and needs to rest. That isn't necessarily defiance of authority. So we've got to do some mental health first aid, some psychological first aid, some de-escalation techniques. If I'm a child coming from trauma and I have a teacher standing over me, jumping on me for something, what's going to happen? Am I triggering her? You bet I am. You bet I am. So some trainings on that. With the help of the Department of Mental Health, we chose evidence-based interventions and programs. For years, we've had people coming in and out with the newest and best program around. They stay a year and they disappear because we find out the program wasn't as good as they thought it was. And so actually identifying evidence-based programs. We've also further down, if you want to kind of scan that so I don't read it to you, we're adopting a universal screener because the OPNA is given to 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. We need to start identifying kids earlier and getting some services to them early in early elementary, not wait until they're in middle school, and then providing interventions to support the needs they have. We're also actually putting in specific programs. I won't read those, but just a couple of them. Friends, Pen Resilience, Botvine, I can never say it, Alcohol EDU, and Cognito. Tier 2 and 3, this is where Dr. McDaniel is talking about actually putting the services kids need specific to their needs in buildings, in classrooms, one-on-one with kids. How was that? Questions? I started running through that real fast.